We are recording. Okay, today I'm picking up where I left off quite a while ago. It's been a couple months, and it's been a long time because I have done a great deal of experimentation with Blender, grease pencil, for the purpose of creating animation, particularly anime style animation. And in the meantime, I've also fiddled around with open tunes and some other apps, not all of which are free or open source, but I do keep coming back to Blender uh, as a very good solution. But there's a definite, at least for me, an ideal way to sort of approach the workflow that I think is important and I want to share. Uh, this information I really haven't seen anywhere else online where anyone else is doing it the way I do it. I'm sure someone is, but um, so let's talk about the layout here. What I've done is I've got a main scene that is already set up for grease pencil. If I zoom out, you can see it's the camera view. I have played around with working in front the front view, and that is useful because you have the grid. But generally, what I found is in practice, I kind of want that guideline of the camera and to know what I'm dealing with in terms of the camera. So, just go ahead and work in the camera views, sort of where I've landed. A few things of interest up here, the brushes. I've got a selection of brushes. Most of the work I'm doing is with the sketch brush and the super smooth ink. So the sketch brush, it's got its drawing curves set in such a way that I can sketch fairly lightly, and then if I push a little harder, I can get a firmer line. But this is here for laying out my scene, if you will, or just kind of doing design work, and ultimately will get thrown away. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just sketch a kind of a design of a character here so you can see what that might look like in practice. Now, as I'm doing this, I want to say that animation is, no matter what you do, it's a lot of work. So as much as possible, you kind of want to think in terms of not creating animation per se, but in terms of creating static artwork. So if I have this character that I'm designing, I want to bake as much of this character's design into either a possibly a single grease pencil layer, or maybe even bake it to an image, render it out as a ping, and then map it to a plane, which I do quite a bit. And you'll see as we go through this why that can be a real time saver. The idea is you want to think of your character or the elements of your scene as being sort of grouped together as much as possible. Okay. Now, I've complained in the past that the grease pencil in its current iteration, and I don't know much about the details of how the new implementation for Blender 2.8 is going to work. My basic idea at this point has been I want to arrive at a workflow that does not depend on whatever changes the guys are going to make with Blender 2.8. And then when those changes arrive and are fairly well tested, then maybe we'll go ahead and adopt 2.8. But at this point, our concept is we're moving forward with 2.79. Okay. By the way, granted, this isn't a particularly anime looking character. I'm just doing what sort of comes naturally to me. And so this is what we'll work with. Now, you'll notice when I sketch, the line sort of disappears a little bit and gets lighter. That is because of this preference. Let me show you. In user preferences, if you click simplify stroke, it reduces the number of points, but as near as I can tell, it also reduces the density, if you will, of the lines you draw. So if I go back to drawing now without that on, everything's a little darker. But for my purposes, what I found is, first of all, I want Simplify Stroke on for when I'm inking. And second, it doesn't really hurt anything in terms of my ability to create a design that I can work with for reference later. It works fine, so I just go ahead and leave that on. You know, communicate with me if you want to find out more details about my, my pen settings or whatever. Okay, so as I have explored animation workflow, what is always the area that's most problematic, no matter what application you use, and I've fiddled around with TV Paint, I fiddled around with Toon Boom, Flash. I mean, let's just go down the list. I've messed with them. They all have qualities to recommend them, and they all have idiosyncrasies that can be annoying at times. Again, like I said, in practice, I find myself I keep coming back to Blender. So the problem, I shouldn't call it a problem. It's a good thing. In Blender wants to work with shapes, as objects. Hence, when you have a color, you've got an outline color and a fill color. So it kind of wants you to think in terms of creating a bunch of objects and then sort of layering them in. And so now this is the part that I really haven't heard anyone else out there say. What I'm finding is the best way to work with Blender Grease Pencil is to not try to think in terms of objects, but rather think in terms of outlining in a more traditional anime production workflow. So in other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sketch, and the next step is not going to be to start creating objects and blocks of color and all this sort of thing, but rather I'm just going to create a black and white drawing that can be filled later. And what I'm finding is a lot of times that filling process is actually not being done with the grease pencil, but with the UV editor. Surprisingly, I found that Blender's UV editor is actually as good as or better than most applications for doing really rapid flood filling of a design. And what was I going to say? Oh, and working with image sequences as well. So if you have an animated sequence, it's pretty fast to go ahead and get it all colored in. Now, if it's convenient to go ahead and take, like in this case of this character, maybe I would go ahead and create his head as a single shape, like using this color, typical skin. I'll just show you real quick if I were to do that. Okay, I go ahead and draw this shape, and boom, it's filled in. Okay, so that's convenient. And as you go through your work, if the scene or the character lends itself to that, go ahead and do it. But what I found is for the precision we want and the aesthetic we want, it's almost better to just do it the old school way and think in terms of outlining. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my grease pencil layers to kind of show you what's going on there. Okay, so that's over here on the right hand side of the screen. You'll see that I've got three layers. Okay, the top one is the sketch. So when I'm ready to ink this guy, that layer is still going to stay on top. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lock it, and that way I can do my inking, and potentially I could use blocks of color and layer up a lot of elements, and I'm still going to see the sketch, over top of it, and because it's locked, it's not going to be, I'm not going to accidentally change it or, anything like that. Okay, so now the next technique I'm going to show you is, well, let me explain the problem I'm trying to solve. The problem I'm trying to solve is Blender does not really have a snapping capability. So if I'm drawing ink lines, and so now I'm going to, just so you know, I'm going to jump to my temp layer. I'm going to draw some ink lines. Okay, so now if I draw a line here, actually, sorry about that. I need to switch to my super smooth ink. Okay, So this is a complex area where there's a little bit of overlap here, say, between the eyebrow and the eye. Okay, so if you were thinking in terms of objects, you might say, well, okay, let's draw the shape of the eye, and I'm kind of drawing fairly crappily here because I'm just trying to hurry up and show you this quickly, and then you might draw the eyebrow over top of it like this. Okay, so now they're layered properly. What I seem to keep finding is that in practice, working that way with objects, as I kind of alluded to earlier, winds up actually being more trouble than it's worth in a lot of cases. So I'm more interested in just getting good ink. I want this to wind up resolving to an ink drawing or an image sequence of animation that's fully inked, just like old school animation, and we're going to worry about coloring it later. Okay? So with that in mind, I'm going to say, well, okay, what if I follow this contour here? And let's go ahead and give that brow some thickness, let's say. But what I really want is I want the eye to start right here. Okay. Okay, so now we've run into a couple of problems. First of all, because of the simplifying that I showed you earlier, the line being simplified, we wind up with fewer points here than we actually drew, about half as many. I want the smoothing so I get smooth round lines as much as possible, but in this case I don't really want it smoothed here. Okay, so it did more smoothing than I wanted. That's problem number one. Problem number two is, obviously, if I go to try to fill this, this is not closed, so if I filled the eye with white, let's say, it's not going to fill properly, right? What's going to happen is the whole drawing is going to get filled with white. So what do we do about that? You can edit. Editing is one solution. So you hit, and I'm going to switch to my mouse now for editing. It's actually a little faster. So I'm going to hit the G button to move this, and then I'm just going to reduce the magnet. Okay, and just put that there, and then maybe drag this up here like that, and then hit the S key to scale it and put that point back in. Okay, so that's a legitimate way to do it. And now I've got a nice, well, actually this one's got to be fixed as well. Okay, so now I've got closed shapes. I could take these guys right here and just hit the S key to scale it, and just scale it to 0, essentially take those points and scale them all to one spot. Okay, so now if I hide the sketch and do an OpenGL render, which, and by the way, when I render this, it has, I'm using transparency for the alpha, and you'll see why later. So I don't want it to have the white or gray background of the drawing. I want it to be transparent. Okay, now I think to keep this thing moving along, what I'm going to do is go ahead and show you something here really quick that you may not have seen before. Okay, so I'm going to hit F10 to do an OpenGL render of just this little bit that I drew. Okay, now I'm going to hit F3, and let's just go to my stuff folder, and I'm just going to call that untitled ping and save it. Okay, so now I'm going to go, I'm hitting Control right arrow to go 2 screens over. This is kind of a remnant from an earlier experiment. What I'm going to do is open the image, and again, go to the stuff folder and load up untitled paint. Okay, so there it is. Now, I say I want to paint that white, and let's say I want to paint the brow sort of this color. Okay, so what you're going to find is you can go hog wild with this, and if this was an image sequence that was animated, you could just hit your right arrow key and you can really flood fill stuff really, really quickly. Okay. If I hit the Alt S key, that image just got saved. So the image I rendered got saved. Now if I go back here to my 3D view, this is kind of the workflow thing I've arrived at that I think is pretty effective. And I go to my background images, okay, and I open up that, and I make it fully opaque. Okay, so now what I have is I have the drawing with the colored version of it actually underneath as a background image. And you can do that to whatever extent you want. You could do it with an image sequence. You could, you know, if I re-render this, you know, now what I've done is I've recomped comped meaning composited. I've effectively recomposited my outlines back over the colored drawing. And if I hit F3 again and save that, then what I'll find is when I go back here, it's updated. Okay, so now you're going to complain about the aliasing. And I have a couple thoughts about that, okay, because it's true, there is some aliasing here. I think, first of all, I'm going to double check my OpenGL render options because it is doing a full sample. My basic opinion on the aliasing problem is if you look at the rendered imagery that comes out of OpenTunes and other programs, just suffice to say that a certain amount of aliasing is okay. It really doesn't, it's not problematic that there is a little bit of stair-stepping there. And there's some things we could do in post to soften that up if it was a really, really big deal. So my basic attitude at this point is I'm not worried about the aliasing problem. I would say subjectively that, and it could have something to do with the GPU, the anti-aliasing on my laptop seems to be better than what I'm seeing here. This is not a particularly powerful computer. I mean, I've got a 12-core and an 8-core machine out in the other room, but this is actually just a lowly dual-core machine. And that's important to me. I mean, I want to be able to, I want to have a workflow that is functional on fairly modest hardware. I don't want to need the latest, greatest stuff to be able to get stuff done. So that's just my little conceit. Take it or leave it. Okay, I'm going to turn the sketch back on. Well, actually, yeah. So I'm still in my temp layer. But now I'm going to go ahead and turn, I've sort of jumped a few steps ahead. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the background image. Okay. And I'm also going to hit, go into edit mode. So D tab. I'm going to select all these guys and get rid of them. Okay. So now I'm going to show you the technique I've been using for inking that is quite non-intuitive, but actually works shockingly well a lot of the time. And what it is and I would say this too, for certain types of animation, you know, hit Control D and just use a polyline, you know, like this. You're going to get nice clean outlines and et cetera, et cetera. And if you wanted to take that and smooth it out a bit, you could just select all. I've got a hotkey to subdivide it, so subdivide it a couple times and then use the oh brother, what's the edit strokes? I'm using the smooth capability to go ahead and just smooth those strokes out. So yeah, I mean, you can go in and fiddle around and mess with it. That's not the technique I've really been using though. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So for demonstration purposes, here's the technique I was getting at. You just go ahead and draw. So you hit the D key, and then you just draw a point. Okay, and then you say, well, and I'll show you in a minute why this is important. Actually, in the case of this nose, I don't actually think I want that there. So I'm going to go ahead and just do what I would normally do. And then I will explain when it is appropriate to do so. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the M key to move that to the ink layer. Okay, so now you'll see that the ink layer is locked, the sketch layer is locked, so I'm doing all my basic work in the temp layer. Why? Here's why. This next stroke will show you. I'm going to switch back to my tablet so I can do a better job of showing you. I'm going to hit the D key, and now I'm going to go boom, boom, little curved line, dot, line. I hit A to select all, and then I hit Control J to join them. Okay. If I wanted this to be a closed shape, I've got a hotkey set up where I can go Control Shift J, and that does this right here, toggle cyclic, whichever that is. Okay, but I don't want to do that. So then I just hit M and move that into the ink layer. So now I'm gonna start moving fast, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The reason this is useful is because it allows you to mix nice curves with points. If you've got some nice smoothing on, then this point would, well, I'll show you. If you went like this, that's what's going to happen. That's not what you want to happen. Okay, so here we go again. Let's try it again. Dot, dot, curve, curve. Okay. A to select all, Control J, Control Shift J closes it, M to move it to the ink layer. Okay, same thing over here. Dot, dot. I'm actually gonna go like this. Boom, boom. All, Control J, Control Shift J. Move that to the ink layer. Grab these two guys. And actually I want to join them. I don't want to toggle cyclic because that would, well, I'll show you. It would do that, which is not what we want. So move that to the ink layer. Okay, so you say, well, this is a little bit tedious, and you're correct. However, in my experience, what I've been finding is it's, go on YouTube and find some examples of anime producers doing ink and paint. And what you're going to discover is the way they do it's just as tedious, if not more so. Okay. And move that to the ink layer. Oh, my bad. I actually want this to be cyclic. So there we go. So that closed it up. Back into my temp layer. So I'm going to start moving a little faster here. And draw that. Okay, I'm gonna have to fix that, but I can fix that by just going, just draw another line. I'm actually starting to wonder if the simplify is such a great thing. It seems to almost create more problems than it's solving. Okay. This will be a good example of what I was talking about. Okay. I think I need to move that to the ink layer. Okay, so now I'm going to hit select, or I'm going to hit A to select all. Control J and Control Shift J. Oops, sorry. Did not want that to be cyclic. So move that to ink and just keep going. Boom, boom. Okay, the hair we're going to want to deal with as kind of a complex shape. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and move this into the ink layers to get it out of the way. Now watch this. This is where this technique sort of pays off. 1, 2, because again, Blender doesn't have any snapping. So there's no real good way to make sure that lines are going to connect the way you want, right? So Control J, let's move that to the ink. All right, draw. Now I'm being more careful right now about getting this to line up right, because if I join them the way I've been doing, this particular one isn't going to look right. So let's just go ahead and grab all those, move those to the ink. and keep doing what we're doing. So again, I mean, for me, I'm always looking for ways to make the process as efficient as I can. But I think, as many people before me have learned, there's nothing fast about animation. If you're going to do it, you got to accept the fact that it's a long, hard bunch of work, you know, to create something cool. And so let's move that to the ink layer. And we're almost done, actually. So boom. Okay. Yeah, I'm actually thinking this simplify strokes thing is going to be a non-starter. That was actually something I put in my preferences just today, and I'm kind of regretting it. Okay. Grab all these guys. Control J, Control Shift. Oh, we don't want Control Shift J. Move that to the ink layer. There is, I would say there's essentially no point to putting his eyeballs in, because invariably you're going to want to animate the eyeballs over top, you know, it probably in another layer or whatever, you know. So I'm going to go ahead and I think to fix this, I'm going to do this way. Let's grab the ink layer. Just stretch that down to there. Stretch that up to there. You can hit the shift key to give you a lot more ability to fine-tune your manipulation. Okay. All right, and now I'm going to turn off the sketch. Okay, and presumably this could be, you know, baked together as a solid image over which you might animate the guys. You might erase the mouth, actually. You might just leave the mouth off. In fact, let's do that. Let's just get rid of the strokes for that. This makes more sense. This is more what you'd want to be starting with. In the real world, you might even want to leave the eyebrows off, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and render that. Hit Shift F3. Do the same thing I did before. Go over here. Alt R to reload that. And so now let's just go ahead and I want to actually tell you one thing. This is important. I don't know if this is a bug or a feature. If you do your outlining, you notice the ink line here? It is, the RGB values are at 0.1, not 0. If this was actually black instead of a really dark gray, then when you come over here and try to do flood filling, Blender cannot find the outlines. It can't be actual black. It's got to be, like I said, gray. I don't know why. I really don't have a clue on that one. But let's go ahead and put, you know, some sort of skin tone. Boom. Fill that up. Boom. Boom. I'm just working quick and dirty here. You can hit the S key to sample a color that you've already used. Okay, so now we see we've got a problem. Yep, there's the problem right there. All right, so let's hit undo. And if we haven't gone very far, you know, we might just re-render it. But in this case, what we'll do is we'll go to text draw, and this guy should be dark but not black. I'm just gonna, I don't know, that's a little bit thick. Let's go to 1 pixel. And I don't want any variation at all. I just want that to be 1 pixel. Why is that? It seems too gray. Okay. So anyway, pull that back. Sample this guy. I can use my hotkeys to get back to my tool. So let's see here. Fill is 2. Text draw is 6. So there, that's better. All right, Alt S to save that guy. Come back here, and if I turn my background image back on, Add the image, and we're just going to use the same one we used before. And is that fully opaque? It is not. Let's go here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so now one question you might ask yourself. I'm going to hit save to save my project. We'll just save that in the stuff folder as well. Okay, so what about like shadows and stuff? There's basically two ways I can think of to do that. One is you can have a shadow color in your palette, and that's going to kind of look like something like this. Well, okay, that's it. Timeout. I am turning this off. This was a mistake. Simplify stroke is not helping me today. Okay, so yeah, there we go. So I can go ahead and obviously you probably would have wanted to do this before you rendered it, but I don't like that. Okay. But the tools are there, but what about getting a perfectly lined up shadow here? Okay, let's do it this way. If we go back in here, go to our texture draw, and I'm thinking about 50 pixels at a strength of 0.2-ish, set it to multiply mode. Okay. I'm going to turn this radius down a little bit. And let's say we want to get real creative with the shadows. Okay. Now for my purposes, I'm not quite happy with the eyes. Whoops. So I'm going to go ahead and pick, I'm going to pick this color. I'm going to pick a neutral gray from my interface and then just push that up to white. Okay, see, now the problem is, this is where you know, plan ahead. That the whites of his eyes had a little bit of pink in it, and so now I'm hitting the threshold there, which is a little irritating. That's poor planning, folks. My fault, totally. But because of that gradient, I'm gonna actually try a different method here. I'm gonna turn my threshold, because I got my threshold set up I've got my threshold for filling set to 0. If it is, what I find is, if it's much higher, Blender will miss the outlines and just fill in the whole area. So there we go. All right, if we want to be picky, Alt S, and now I go back to my 3D view and all my changes have propagated, which is really kind of cool. Okay, all right, so now I can adjust that, and what do you think? I think that I'm going to go ahead and, for the purposes of this thing, I'm going to go you know, take that shadow out. Okay, now what I'm going to do is give this guy some eyes. 0, select L for linked, Shift Control S to make it a circle, Shift D to duplicate it. Okay, so now we can jump over here and obviously put in, you know, some animation, right? Okay. Whoops, didn't mean to grab that. Okay, using a filled color here was not the brightest thing I've ever done, but for demonstration purposes. Okay, so you can see what the other issue here is, that I shouldn't have put the lower lip indication in there. So what I should have done is baked the whole everything without the mouth and the eyes at all, and then, you know, leave that for animating later. Okay, so we say, well, what if you wanted to fix that? We can fix that. There is a way. I'm going to leave the eyeballs in there, but I'm going to come back over here and just sample that color. And there you go, all S. And so now I can do exactly what I described. Okay. I'm going to, how do I want to do this? Let's go ahead and get rid of that just because it's causing me grief. Okay. So, and again, I mean, obviously the point here is just to kind of show you how you can do this. So, right? Okay, and you say, well, with all the colors baked into a background image, that's kind of that's a little bit dangerous, because what if you needed to animate him? It's a great question, and it is a very real concern. In practice, for many situations, what I would probably actually do is I would do this color work, come back here, render the still image, and then map that to a plane. And that's what I would actually animate over top of. So how would that look? Well, let's get rid of the background image. Okay. And for our purposes, let's just go ahead and hide the ink layer. And now I'm going to recommend that, well, actually, this is a plugin that comes with Blender. Import images as planes. So it's already there. You do have to activate it, I believe, with the default installation. So I'm going to import images as planes. There's my untitled.png. And I'm going to come down here. I'm going to make it a shadeless material so that, okay, then I need to switch this to texture mode. And now I've got this that I can animate over top of. So I can scale it, you know, put it where I want. And we'll go ahead and I'm just going to delete this layer because I'm almost done for today. So I'm just going to sort of do this quick and dirty. All right. Okay. Oops. Control Z. I got DB to insert a blank frame. And DB again. And sorry. Let's put a little shadow there. Oops. Kind of missed. All right. Go to the previous keyframe. Add that shadow. Previous keyframe. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, did I accidentally insert interpolation? I think I might have. I got a bunch of keyframes there that I don't know where they came from. Well, that's what this is for. So let's just start back here at the beginning. Well, this is animation for you, man. Things go wrong. Okay. Get rid of that. That's cool. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay. So anyway, there's our guy. And you say, well, yeah, but what if you animate his whole head? What do you do with those grease pencil layers? Well, what you do is you parent it to the plane. So the plane that I brought in that has him, his face baked into it, is now the parent of this grease pencil layer. So then when I hit go, they all move together. So you can animate him. And you could obviously make it more complex by, say, adding a plane axis empty. Grab this, parent it to the empty, Control P, you know, so that you can then, you know, do a rotation. And let's turn on automatic keying just to make this really easy. So let's go back here and let's go like this. Okay, I'm gonna go from this to this. And right here in the middle, I'm going to go scale on the Z. So that you've got that animation. I'm going to turn this to only render. We'll deal with the eyebrows or the eyeballs on another day, right? Okay, and I'm going to hit Control F10. And I get a fully composited animation of my character with a little bit of lip sync action going on. It all worked together pretty well. Now, frankly, that's more animation. With that scaling I did on the Z-axis, that's really more animation than you're normally going to want on an anime. I mean, anime is all about static imagery for the most part. Control F11. See? There it is. See, it worked. Okay, so that's it for today. Hope it was helpful, and I'm sure I'll be back again some other time to report on what I've learned. So, anyway, good luck.